The first time Caden North was told he was going to host 2 alien exchange students for a semester, he assumed it was a joke. Not a casual prank, but the kind of elaborate, long-game satire his colleagues in the psychology department loved to stage. But when 2 representatives from the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Initiative showed up in his office with a stack of onboarding documents and a security-cleared translator drone, he realized this was very real. "They will arrive Wednesday," said the older representative, adjusting his blazer with the stiffness of someone unused to Earth's gravity. "We understand your field is human stress management. Their curriculum requires exposure to high adaptability species. You were selected based on your fieldwork." Caden scratched his head. "Fieldwork? You mean that time I got stranded in the Andes and had to eat moss for 3 days?" The representative didn't blink. "Precisely." Caden signed the forms. Wednesday came with a drizzle that turned to sleet by midday. By the time the university's South Quad had cleared of students, a low hum pulsed over the faculty courtyard, and a silver vessel the size of a moving truck hovered silently above the lawn. A door irised open, and 2 beings stepped out, one tall and sinewy, with skin like weathered copper, the other shorter and more compact, with limbs that folded like origami. The tall one introduced himself as Veln. The shorter one was Yilu. Both spoke through a translation node hovering between them, its voice oddly soothing, like an elevator announcement. Caden extended a hand. Veln stared at it. Yilu tilted his head. Then Veln reached out and grasped Caden's wrist instead. "Close enough," Caden muttered, leading them toward the psychology building. That Friday, he brought them to his undergraduate seminar, Coping Mechanisms in Modern Societies. Veln sat upright, hands folded. Yilu crouched on the floor, legs stowed beneath him like a folding chair. "Today," Caden said, clicking the remote to change slides, "we'll talk about stress response. And the most common, least understood one, humor." He turned to the class. "Anyone want to define humor?" A girl in the back raised her hand. "Something that makes people laugh?" Caden grinned. "Sure, but it's more than that. Humor is a pressure valve. It helps us survive emotionally overwhelming situations without collapsing." Yilu's head snapped up. "Like jokes at a funeral?" she asked. "Exactly," Caden said. "We joke when we're scared, overwhelmed, or in pain. It's not just fun, it's survival." Veln raised a hand, surprisingly human-like. "You mean your species uses amusement as medicine?" "Not literally," Caden said, "but close. It's a kind of mental first aid. We joke about things that scare us because it gives us power over them." Veln's brow furrowed. "That is illogical. If a situation is dangerous or painful, distraction compromises action." "Maybe," Caden said. "But sometimes, distraction is how we endure long enough to act." Yilu slowly raised one multi-jointed hand. "Is this why your species jokes about death?" Caden nodded. "Yeah, and taxes, and marriage, and public restrooms." The class laughed. Veln and Yilu did not. Later that night, Caden took them to an open mic at a downtown bar. The place was packed with graduate students and locals. The stage was lit by a single yellow spotlight. A young man stepped up and launched into a routine about student loans, ending with, "If I die tomorrow, at least my debt dies with me." The crowd erupted in laughter. Veln leaned toward Caden. "He just implied self-termination." "Yeah," Caden said. "It's exaggerated. That's how we cope with our financial system." Veln sat stiffly. "Your species makes light of institutional oppression." "Pretty much." Yilu whispered, "Why aren't they afraid?" Caden looked at Yilu, then back at the stage. "Who says we're not?" The next few weeks were filled with observations. The aliens followed Caden everywhere: lectures, counseling sessions, even a field trip to a trauma recovery center. They watched humans laugh after recounting car crashes, family deaths, and failed surgeries. Veln took notes. Yilu recorded everything. Then came the incident. Caden was with a small group of students, driving back from a mental health symposium in Minneapolis. Veln and Yilu sat in the back, curious about intercity travel. Somewhere south of the Wisconsin border, a snowstorm swept in fast. Visibility dropped. The van skidded on black ice and spun across the median, slamming into a guardrail. The airbags saved them, but Caden's ribs didn't. He groaned, crumpled awkwardly in the driver's seat, half conscious, trying to breathe through the pain. Veln unbuckled and climbed forward. "Your thoracic structure is compromised." Caden coughed. "Thanks for the update, Veln." Yilu activated the emergency beacon, then turned toward the back. One student had a bleeding forehead. Another was sobbing. The third tried to open the stuck side door. Caden wheezed. "Everyone okay?" "Minor injuries," Veln said. "Except you." "I'll live," Caden muttered. "I think." Veln looked baffled. "You are incapacitated." "Why attempt humor?" Caden closed his eyes. "Because panic won't help. But a joke might keep me from passing out." When the paramedics arrived, they had to cut Caden free. His breathing was shallow. The ER confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a bruised lung. He spent 4 days in the hospital, barely able to move without gasping. Veln and Yilu visited daily. On the 3rd day, while Caden struggled to reach his water cup, Yilu asked, "Were you truly not afraid?" "I was terrified," Caden rasped. "But if I let that show, the students would have panicked. Someone had to pretend everything was okay." Veln leaned forward. "So you used humor? To deceive them?" "To protect them," Caden said. "There's a difference." Yilu sat silently, watching the heart monitor beep. 2 weeks later, Caden was back on campus, still tender, but upright. Veln requested a private meeting. "We have reviewed your species' use of humor," Veln said. "It is not as we assumed." "I figured," Caden said, easing into his chair. "We believed it to be a recreational behavior. A luxury. But it is. Structural. Integral." Yilu added, "It masks fear. Stabilizes identity. Preserves dignity." Caden nodded. "It's not a joke." "Not really." That evening, they attended another open mic. This time, Caden performed. He took the stage slowly, ribcage still taped. The microphone caught his breath hitching. So he began. "I crashed a van full of students and 2 aliens. And I gotta say, of all the things I expected to apologize for in my career, interstellar diplomacy via car wreck was not on the list." The crowd laughed. He continued, "Turns out, nothing bonds a group like shared trauma, road salt, and the smell of burnt airbag." More laughter. Veln and Yilu sat in the front row. This time, they didn't just observe. They laughed too. For days after the open mic, Caden sat stiffly at the corner of a long table inside the university's behavior lab, his ribs still aching with every lean forward. Across from him, Veln and Yilu observed a set of monitors showing live feeds from a controlled stress experiment in the adjacent room. A volunteer student, sweating slightly, was being asked to solve arithmetic problems while an artificial voice berated her for every misstep. "She's failing deliberately," Veln said, eyes narrowing. "No," Caden replied, adjusting his chair slowly. "She's under pressure." That voice triggers a fight or flight response. Her brain's prioritizing survival over math. "She is not in danger," Yilu said. "Your species knows this protocol." "Consciously, sure," Caden said. "But her amygdala doesn't care. It fires like she's being chased through a burning building." Yilu tapped a finger against the desk. "And still, she laughs." The girl in the other room had just chuckled after miscounting a sequence. The voice had called her statistically below average, and she laughed while muttering something under her breath. "Exactly," Caden said. "She's trying to break the tension, even if it's just for herself." Veln crossed his arms. "You were telling us the laughter is not directed at humor. It is aimed at the stressor." "Pretty much. It's a countermeasure." The experiment ended. The monitors dimmed. Caden stood slowly, one hand pressed against his side. "Come on. I want to show you something that doesn't involve insults and bad lighting." They walked across campus, passing a group of students chalking protest slogans on the pavement. Yilu paused to read them aloud. "Tuition breeds despair." Veln tilted his head. "Your species incites rebellion with colored dust?" "Only the nonviolent kind," Caden muttered. "Usually." They entered the university archives, where Caden had arranged access to the department's collection of historical stress artifacts. He led them to a climate-controlled room filled with old photos, handwritten journals, and a sealed glass case containing a battered harmonica. "This belonged to a World War II medic," he said. "Used it between surgeries and field hospitals. Played it while stitching up soldiers." Veln leaned in. "It emits sound waves. That is its function." "Yeah." "And back then, it helped people stay sane." The guy who used it wrote that every time he played, for a few minutes, the screaming stopped. Even if it didn't. Yilu walked along the display, scanning a yellowed newspaper clipping. "This article describes a man who told jokes during an earthquake." "Yeah," Caden said. "He was trapped under rubble with 3 others. Kept making up stories about their rescue involving pizza and helicopters. 2 of them survived." They say they would have given up if he hadn't talked. Veln stared at the harmonica. How often do you rely on improvisation to survive? Constantly, Caden said. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, but we adapt. Sometimes by building machines, sometimes by laughing when we should be screaming. They exited into a sudden downpour. Caden groaned and pulled his jacket closed. Of course. Yilu didn't flinch, rain slipping off his smooth exoskin. You are displeased. No umbrella, Caden said. And this jacket isn't even water-resistant. Veln blinked. You did not check meteorological data before exiting shelter? Nope. And now you are wet. Observant, as always. Yilu asked, will you become ill? Probably. Then why are you smiling? Caden laughed. Because it's ridiculous. I'm teaching aliens about human resilience while getting soaked like a rookie freshman during orientation week. It's absurd. You are amused by your failure to prepare adequately for atmospheric exposure? Yup. They reached the psych building again, dripping. Veln took a moment before stepping inside. I believe I am beginning to understand. Later that evening, the trio gathered in Caden's office. He sipped tea slowly, wincing when he shifted. Yilu stared at the space heater as if it were an artifact. Veln stood by the window, watching sleet tap against the glass. I have a question, Yilu said, turning from the heater. Do your people ever run out of adaptation? Caden set the mug down and folded his hands. Sometimes, but we hate admitting it. Veln tapped the window. Your body is damaged. You are functioning at reduced capacity. You engage in activities despite this. Yeah. I have to. Why? If I stop, I'll feel like I've already lost. Yilu studied him. So you continue out of pride? No. Out of need. People count on me. If I'm broken, I still have to be useful. Yilu looked at the floor. Our species isolates those who are impaired. Until they are healed. Caden shrugged. We don't always have that luxury. Veln turned from the window. It is inefficient. Maybe, Caden said softly. But it keeps us moving. And sometimes, that's enough to survive. A soft chime echoed from Yilu's comm disk. He glanced at it, then looked at Caden. We are invited to observe a crisis drill tomorrow. Simulated disaster response. Caden raised an eyebrow. Where? Subterranean engineering unit. Gas leak scenario. Containment and casualty management training. Great, Caden muttered. More stairs. Veln glanced at him. You are not required to attend. I know, but I will. The next day, Caden braced himself at the entrance of the underground facility. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and metal. Emergency lights flickered inside the tunnel, casting long shadows. Students in hazmat suits moved in choreographed urgency. Veln and Yilu followed, eyes scanning every detail. Caden leaned against a column, breathing carefully. A student stumbled out of the simulation room, her suit visor fogged. She was laughing. Caden waved her down. What happened? She pulled the helmet off. The dummy we were rescuing had "Kick Me" written on its back. Someone snuck it on. Caden chuckled. Let me guess. Team 3. Of course. Veln turned. You inserted humor into a mass casualty scenario? No, Caden said. They did. This is a training exercise for a deadly event. Exactly why it needs levity. Yilu stared into the simulation chamber. Even in artificial danger, your people create laughter. It lowers the stakes. Make sure panic doesn't settle in. If they freeze in a real crisis, people die. The student re-entered the simulation. Caden exhaled slowly. Veln stood silent for several seconds. We have no equivalent? Caden nodded. I figured. Yilu asked, do you fear that one day, your coping will fail? Every day, Caden said. But until then, we laugh. That night, back in the residence suite assigned to the exchange program, Yilu sat in front of a small portable screen, watching clips of emergency broadcasts from Earth history. He paused on one from a hurricane evacuation, where a reporter stood waist-deep in water while a man in a dinosaur costume floated by in a canoe, waving. Veln entered quietly. You are still studying? Yilu didn't look away. This species places absurdity inside horror. It is deliberate. Yes, Veln said. It keeps them from fracturing. Yilu switched off the screen. I do not know if that is strength or denial. Perhaps both. They sat in silence for a while. Then Yilu asked, do you believe we could learn it? Veln looked at the closed door to Caden's room, where muffled coughing could be heard between episodes of an old sitcom. We already have, he said. By late March, The snow had dissolved into stubborn gray slush along the campus walkways, and the smell of wet concrete hung in the air like a permanent sigh. Caden's ribs had mostly healed, though he still avoided stares and laughed more carefully than usual. Veln and Yilu had extended their exchange stay by 3 weeks, citing unanticipated variables and behavioral mapping. The paperwork had cleared without protest. Apparently, Earth was proving more educational than expected. That afternoon, a faculty networking mixer was underway in the university's antiquated humanities hall, which, for some reason, lacked central heating. A portable furnace wheezed in the corner of the reception room while professors huddled near the cheese cubes and tried not to look like they regretted attending. Caden leaned against the edge of a drink table, nursing a cup of lukewarm ginger ale, watching Veln and Yilu attempt to understand the concept of mingling. Veln stood perfectly still, surrounded by a trio of chairs pushed outward at awkward angles, like a broken orbit. Yilu had taken an interest in a decorative bowl of dried potpourri and was now carefully sniffing each desiccated flower shard. "They're doing great," said Dr. Yilu, a cultural anthropologist who'd helped with the exchange program orientation. She was sipping red wine and watching the aliens with a kind of academic pride usually reserved for successful grant applications. "They've learned to loiter," Caden said. "A major leap." Kenna nudged his arm gently. "You look like you're still hurting." "Only when I try to sneeze or sleep on my left side." "You should have taken longer medical leave." "I did," Caden said. "It just didn't help." Across the room, Veln approached a cluster of tenured faculty discussing departmental budgets. He listened for a moment, then interjected. "Why do you refer to the new administrative software as a flaming wheel of despair?" The group turned in unison. One of them, a professor from English literature, chuckled. "Because it never works, costs too much, and we're all being slowly crushed beneath it." Veln tilted his head. "Yet you use metaphor instead of protest?" "Because protest got us a worse system last time," the professor said. "At least despair is familiar." Veln stood a moment longer, then walked back to Caden. "I've concluded that your species uses theatrical exaggeration as a form of communal resilience." Caden nodded. "We call it sarcasm." Yilu returned, still holding a small piece of potpourri. "This does not nourish, but it evokes memory." "Yeah," Caden said. "That's kind of the point." A brief lull settled over the room as the catering staff began packing up. One of them dropped a tray of crackers, and someone in the corner clapped sarcastically. Laughter rippled, brief and tired. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and wind scraped at the windows of Caden's office, Veln and Yilu sat across from him on mismatched chairs pulled in from the hallway. Caden was reviewing student reflection essays from the trauma psychology course, flipping pages with one hand while rubbing his temple with the other. Yilu broke the silence. "This morning, I read your neurochemical studies on mirth response. The dopamine release curves are inefficient for energy conservation." "That's not why we evolved it," Caden said. "It's not about saving energy. It's about staying functional under pressure." "Laughter increases heart rate," Veln added. "It mimics distress." "Sometimes it is distress," Caden said. "That's the point. It's a signal that we're overwhelmed, but still intact." Yilu leaned forward. "Then humor is not merely language. It is proof of capacity." "Exactly," Caden said. "It's a sign we haven't broken yet." Veln stood and walked to the window, staring out at the quad. "Your students laughed today during your lecture on survivor guilt." "They did," Caden said, "because the examples were real and painful. They needed space to breathe." "I found it jarring," Veln said. Caden lowered the essay packet. "The first time I counseled a burn victim, he told me a joke about his eyebrows melting off. I laughed. Then I cried later in my car." Both reactions were valid. Yilu turned the potpourri piece over in his hand. "Do you ever laugh when alone?" Caden smiled faintly. "All the time. Usually at things no one else would find funny." "Then it is not only for others," Yilu said. "It is also for the self." Caden nodded. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us from unraveling." There was a long pause. The heater clicked behind them. Veln turned from the window. "Then we would like to attempt it." Caden raised an eyebrow. "We have practiced mimicry," Yilu explained. "But it was hollow. We wish to initiate it authentically." "And you want help?" "Yes," Veln said. "We have identified a potential catalyst. We have selected a human audiovisual recording that is categorized as comedic, but also emotionally destabilizing." Caden blinked. "What is it?" Yilu pulled up the title on his tablet. "A motion picture. Planes, trains and automobiles. It is reportedly humorous, but also tragic. Caden laughed. That's one of my favorites. Then we will watch it, Veln said. 2 hours later, they were seated in Caden's living room. The lights were dimmed. A blanket was draped over Caden's lap, more for warmth than comfort. The film played. Steve Martin scowled. John Candy smiled. Chaos ensued. At first, Veln and Yilu were silent. Then, during the rental car scene, Yilu let out a short, sharp exhale that sounded mechanical but was unmistakably a laugh. Caden grinned. There it is. By the time the hotel room erupted in fire and insults, Veln was rocking slightly in his chair, face unreadable, but his chest moved in short bursts. Then came the final scene. The train station. The moment of realization. The silence. The suitcase. Ilu's hands tightened around the edge of the couch. He was never going home, he said. No, Caden replied. But he hoped. Veln's voice was quiet. He used joy to mask emptiness. Caden leaned back. And that made him human. The credits rolled. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Yilu said, I believe I understand now. Humor is not the opposite of pain. It is how you coexist with it. Veln nodded slowly. And grief becomes bearable if it can be shared in laughter. Caden stood carefully. That's the idea. Yilu placed the potpourri on the table. We will document this. But not clinically. Caden smiled. Good. 3 days later, the aliens prepared for departure. Their ship hovered again above the quad, quieter than last time. Students paused to watch, but no one panicked. Before stepping aboard, Veln turned to Caden. Your species is not efficient. You are not orderly. Your mechanisms are inconsistent. Thanks, Caden said. But you are durable in a way we were not prepared for. Yilu added. You endure through absurdity. That is not a weakness. Caden pulled his jacket tighter. It's our specialty. We mess up, then try again. Usually while laughing. Veln nodded once. That will be in our report. The ship ascended, silver against the pale sky. Caden stood in the wind, watching it shrink. His ribs ached faintly, but he didn't mind. Later that night, he sat alone, rewatching the same movie. He laughed at the same scenes, cried at the same ending. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like he was doing either alone.